certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, Ciara Glennon.
And every time you saw a young girl walking by, you think, oh God, is she going to be the next victim?
Now, one man stands accused.
If police are right and Edwards is the Claremont serial killer, he's been hiding in plain sight for 20 years.
In 1990, a young social worker was attacked by Bradley Edwards, the man now standing trial for the Claremont serial killings. She took the stand today and told her terrifying story for the first time. I'm Natalie Bonjolo. Welcome to Claremont in Conversation. I'm joined as always by Tim Clarke from District Court. And hi, Tim, and Ali Fan.
Hi.
Hi, guys.
Listen, I actually don't know about you two, but my head is spinning today. I mean, last night we heard from this man who was part of this bizarre love triangle. Then today, 8 witnesses, including this woman who, by all accounts, thought, she was fighting for her life.
Yes, this is the first time we've heard from her, and a terrifying account. Here she is sort of working in Hollywood Hospital, and someone she doesn't know just drags her back, stuffs something in her mouth. She said thought she was going to die.
Yeah.
She couldn't breathe. She was worrying about something maybe being laced or contaminated in her mouth, so she stopped breathing. And then just as she was kicking back and this violent struggle he stopped it, just suddenly stopped. And then he apologises.
Yeah, it was given the attack happened nearly 30 years ago. It was like she was recounting it from yesterday. I'm watching her in the doc. I mean, she was physically reenacting it. At one point, she even put her hand over her own mouth to demonstrate. I mean, exactly the physicality and the violence, we've got to say, of the attack. And as Ali said, this is probably the first time she's ever told this story in public, even back in 1990, because Mr. Edwards pleaded guilty. There wasn't a trial. There would have probably been a witness statement given to the magistrate at the time. But there she was, 30 years later, reliving it in Technicolor, and just admitted on the stand, I'm still so distressed by this because I'm having to relive it now.
And Tim, why do you think she was brought on? I mean, this is a case that's passed. Is it to demonstrate violence, or was it to do with a clinical psychologist that said that he thought that Edwards was struggling at the time with his wife's affair, where up until now we've heard it was a bit of ho-hum, we're moving on, you're moving on, who cares sort of thing.
Yeah, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other there, Al, I think. Firstly, obviously, it's propensity, because right up front and right all the way through, the prosecutors are going to say, well, look, this is Mr. Edwards' modus operandi. He attacks lone women from behind with violence, using a cloth. He gags them, tries to subdue them and then drag them off, as he did in this case, as he did in 88 in Huntingdale. He's already admitted that, where he attacked the young girl from behind in her own bedroom, and then obviously Caracatta as well. So there's that propensity. They want to show him as an attacker of lone women, vulnerable women, whether it be day or night. And they also want to use the psychologist's report as basically their springboard for their emotional turmoil motive theory, because as we heard from both doctors who then interviewed Mr. Edwards after this attack today, he told them both, I was upset because of the argument with my girlfriend, who now became his first wife. I was emotionally all over the place, and that's why I did it. So there's 2 strands to that. And plus, I would suggest that they probably want to give this woman a voice as well, and give her a chance to actually tell her story. And she was sat in the same court today as the man who did that to her all those years ago. And as we know from sort of victim empathy and in these days, that's part of the court's role is to let victims tell their own story and reclaim their voice.
And what was his reactions to this today? If she was, demonstrating and she was quite emotive, what was Edwards doing?
Yeah, he was listening quite intently, taking a few notes, as he has been doing this week. He was watching her at times, but not all the time. And as I say,
was she looking at him?
No, she was more really intent on just giving the best evidence she possibly could. I got that impression. But as I say, the physicality that she gave it with, she was twisting on her chair, turning, and basically trying to physically demonstrate to the court, and obviously mostly to the judge, exactly what she'd gone through. On that day where she was just quietly writing a report in a sleepy part of Hollywood Hospital.
Well, that, and of course it was significant because of the fingerprint match, as turned out to the charges that he's already pleaded guilty to. They matched his fingerprints, which were taken at the time, to that attempted sexual attack way back that were left on a door, which were just sort of filed away until they looked at the sex attacks. They linked him with that. But they were the charges that he's pleaded guilty to.
Right.
And I was sort of a little bit puzzled as to why it was coming up here.
I'm interested that the attack stopped and he apologised. What did he say exactly when he apologised? Did she say?
Sorry.
Exactly that. She literally said, one minute I felt like I was fighting for my life, and the next minute it had stopped and he was backing away apologising. I mean, he admitted that apology, or sort of explained that apology to the doctors as well. I'm just saying, I don't know what came over me. I realised what I was doing, and I'm backed away.
And he had admitted to the two psychologists that he had spoken to. He had admitted to having a bad temper and what have you, had he?
Yes, so that was part of. I mean, because when you in a sentencing process, then as to now, the magistrate needs to know all the aspects, and obviously in this case, the court felt there was a psychological aspect to it, and they wanted to get some expert opinion, which is what they've done. And in that, and talking to those experts, Mr. Edwards says, yes, I was upset. I'd had a crap day at work. I couldn't get the system to work. I'd had a row with my wife and the girlfriend the night before. She'd also told me she'd been unfaithful to me with a previous boyfriend. There was pressure on me to get married, and his explanation at the time was this all sort of built up and then exploded on that afternoon.
I mean, I know this probably isn't relevant to the case, but what astounds me is that a man who's convicted of an assault on the job during work time didn't lose his job. I just find that
it was just regarded as a common assault too, so he was only just given probation. It's a wonder they even took his fingerprints. I mean,
you're at work, you're in your uniform, you're representing a company, and you assault someone in broad daylight, and you don't lose your job?
Yeah, and I've got to say, Nat, when all this came out, sort of earlier in the year, as journalists, you sort of you're beholden to ask these questions, and so we did of Telstra, and we got the sort of regulation response that you'd expect. It's before the court, so we don't really want to comment. As it stands today, day 7 of the trial, no one from Telstra, high up in Telstra, has been asked about that during the trial, and whether they will or not.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's probably not relevant to the judge whether he lost his job or not, but it's certainly a question they should be made to answer.
Well, on the face value,
in the future, I would think.
On the face value at the time, if they said he had an emotional upset, he just split up with his wife, he did this one-off, he backed off, it might have just been seen as that, taken at the time. Because, of course, in hindsight, when we know what he's pleaded guilty to since then, it all comes into place. But back then, it would have just been treated face value, common assault, snapped out, silly move, and has apologised.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Well, speaking of Telstra, obviously we also had these Telstra Living Witnesses. Can you just talk us through who they were?
Yeah, so there were 3 today, Nat. These are women that had reported, now we now know at the time, of strange, unnerving, maybe slightly peculiar encounters with a driver of a car in the Claremont and Cottesloe area over that period from sort of 95 to 97. During her opening, Miss Barbara Gallo said that the police basically launched what they termed then a living witness project, because they surmised after Ciara went missing, well, surely these 3 can't be the only time he's tried to pick up women. So they went looking. And according to the prosecution, they found at least 5 incidences of this involving a lone driver, dark-haired man driving a white station wagon with Telstra logos. And today we heard about 3 of those incidences.
Yeah.
By coincidence, they were all very late 96, just before Christmas or maybe just after. 3 women who told of how they had gone for drinks, were on the street basically after midnight, looking for a lift home, failing to get a taxi, and lo and behold, out of the darkness comes this white station wagon driven by a lone man who offered them a lift home, and they all gave their varying accounts of how the car had approached them and what they did when they get in, or they didn't get in some cases. And the third of those was probably the most interesting. The young lady, as she was then, had got into the car by herself, had realised it wasn't a taxi, had said to the driver, "Oh, you're not a taxi," and yet he began to drive off. And it was just then she told the court that she basically said, "Oh, I've left my shoes behind in the park. Do you mind if I stop and go and get them?" And the driver of that car did let her out. She went to get her shoes, and while she was there, she woke up 2 friends that she'd been with, 2 male friends that she'd been with that had gone to sleep in that park, got into the car, and got to a destination safely in Shenton Park.
Wow.
And it just makes you wonder. We talked about those sliding doors moments last week. You know, those tiny little things that can change the course of one's life, and perhaps that was one of those moments for that lady.
And Tim, the earlier one too, she was with friends. She didn't follow through, but she said her friend dragged her out of the car when he stopped at the park. She wasn't allowed to go on with that, but
it was another one of those questions within answers.
She had a sixth sense too, or maybe something a bit more closer.
So what happened with that one? She was in the car, but her friend yanked her out or something?
Yeah, when he slowed down at the park, she said she got her friend dragged her out, but they stopped her there because they didn't want her to elaborate on why her friend had dragged her out, what she'd seen
and that's
or
quite
heard.
proper, Nat, because basically she was this witness today, the second witness. She was about to say what her friend had said. Obviously, that's hearsay evidence, and I've no doubt that at some point in the near or far future, we will hear from that friend,
right?
Who will be able to give her account directly.
We're being teased with a lot of these one-liners that don't go anywhere, aren't we?
Yeah, I know. It's like you remember the old cliffhangers at the end of Doctor Who or something.
I fear for my life, and I nothing more.
You just tease out a nice little moment, and then they cut it off. So hopefully those presents will be wrapped up at some stage.
Yeah. Can you tell us what were those words that the friend had said to her when the prosecution cut her off?
Well, we don't actually know.
We don't know.
So
Yeah,
she
right.
was the friend was in the front. The witness today was in the back. She'd admitted she'd had quite a few drinks and was not really paying attention to what was being said in the front of the car. And then suddenly the car stopped, and this lady has yanked her out. And the friend today said, I didn't really know what was going on. And then she told me ... So,
right, so that was it.
Maybe we'll find out the ... in due course.
You know, the most compelling thing that I think has come out today is the fact that police were investigating Telstra vehicles and Telstra workers July 1996.
Yeah.
That was just after Jane Rimmer had disappeared, before her body was found. It was just after Sarah Spears, but nobody had heard about Telstra until Bradley Edwards was arrested in December 2016.
Yes.
If there had been some warning out, even a hint, because remember we had all those taxi drivers
it was all
come
about
forward.
the taxi drivers.
If we'd held Telstra van, this was before Ciara Glennon was taken.
So what did we find out today? Why were police looking at the Telstra drivers or Telstra cars back in 96? This is because they had heard from these women who'd made reports about Telstra cars?
No, well, actually, Nat, that was to get the timeline right. Ciara goes missing in March 97, and that's when they launched the Telstra Living Witness project. But this predated that. So what we learned today, as Ali so rightly said, I think in terms of learning more about the investigation and what police were looking at. This was the biggest revelation today. So in
July, wasn't it? Yeah.
So in July 1996, there was a fax sent by police to Telstra asking for the names of drivers of cars, a particular type of car, in February 1995. Now, we know that relates to the rape at Karrakatta Cemetery. So that tells us two things. One, there'd been a tip that a Telstra van might have been involved in that offence. And two, at that time, in July 96, the investigators were already linking those two crimes, obviously.
Right.
And then in 1998, there was another request sent by police to Telstra, and this one was much more wide-ranging. They wanted the driver of every car in Telstra. So they were obviously so concerned or convinced, or they were on the track of Telstra.
But we never heard about it.
To such an extent that they wanted the name of every driver of every Telstra car. But we also learned today that if that car that it was being driven at that time had fallen off the books of Telstra, it wouldn't appear on that list. So it would. You can see that the police were, I suppose, tantalisingly close to something way back in the day, but then for whatever reason just couldn't get over the line or couldn't get the information they were after. And as Ali also said, that has never been, or certainly never became public. Then we always knew that the focus was on taxis, but never on Telstra. And who knows what investigative avenues might have been opened up, even if that had leaked out by the back door, let alone the front
because
door.
One of the girls today, she said she thought it was a taxi because the frame, as it came closer, in fact she saw it was a ladder, because you know how the taxis have got those advertising frames on their roof?
Yes.
And she saw the white van coming in because they'd probably had a bit to drink and it was walking along dark, and she was late in the night or early in the morning. She hailed him, thinking it was, and it's only when it got close she realised it was a ladder and it was a Telstra. So you think maybe that should have come out anyway.
Yeah. I mean, we've heard all these psychologists who had said that, this is probably someone who has form. This is an everyday man with form. So it seems extraordinary that we have them looking at Telstra back then, yet at the same time there's someone from Telstra with form. How are those dots not joined?
Yeah, well, I mean, he had form. So at this point in time, the Huntingdale offence was obviously unsolved. You had the Hollywood offence, which was solved, but had not been flagged particularly as a sexual assault. As Ali said, it was a common assault.
Yes.
And so no DNA was ever, it was probably too early for DNA anyway in 1990. There was a fingerprint on the system, and the 1995 Karrakatta rape was unsolved, but as we've learned today, or had it confirmed today, detectives, even way back in the day, were joining the dots between that lone girl taken off the streets of Claremont at night, walking home alone and attacked, and then very similar incidences, obviously, with Ciara in January 96 and Jane later that year.
And with these witnesses that you heard from today, you also heard, we haven't spoken about him yet, but you also have to tell us about the man who they're calling the third wheel and the man who broke up the Edwards marriage. What was he like yesterday?
Oh, he was hugely illuminating. I said in the paper today, I think he gave the most sort of vivid and sort of description of life at home with Mr. and Mrs. Edwards back in the day, and how he basically became the third point of the love triangle, and for want of a better phrase, led to the breakup of the marriage. And he was very open in his answers, very wanting basically to give more information than the court needed. And once again, we were left a little bit wanting more, but he gave plenty, and he was, as I say, he was a very illuminating,
very forthright,
very forthright,
And it did sound like we obviously heard little bits, but it did sound like this very, very bizarre love triangle.
Well, Bradley Edwards had actually moved in with this first wife, who was actually living with another Telstra mate of his. So it was sort of like she shared her bed quite freely. But yes, it got a bit squalid. And I think this guy was just saying she was playing a dangerous game and he wanted out.
Yeah. And were there reactions in the courtroom to some of the things that he was saying?
Well, yeah, there were some sniggers and some chuckles at one point. And Mr. Edwards, I could personally see, was sort of tensing up a bit at another point, where basically this man admitted that while Mr. Edwards was having a lie-in on a Sunday in his bed, his wife would hop out and jump into the bed 2 doors down the corridor, and they would carry on their relationship. So, as Ali said, it got very, very personal again.
And Tim,
probably more personal than was totally necessarily.
Yeah.
And Tim, they're quite different versions. I mean, the first wife was ho-hum, everybody was happy and moved on and nothing really that big a deal. Whereas he gave quite a different picture of the whole thing and how he was tense and he wanted to get out and he didn't like the situation and kept saying to her, well, he's next door while, they were having sex. He was quite uncomfortable with it, whereas she was very sort of, whatever.
Yeah. Well, it's just he was a lot more forthcoming and a lot more exact about details and dates. And until it got to after they'd moved out, I say dates. He couldn't actually remember the date of his daughter's birthday. So there were bits that he was very precise on, and then as again we said last week, the tyranny of time had sort of eroded his memory a little bit.
And we heard with the wife's account, we heard that, like Ali said, that it was all quite smooth and ho-hum and this has happened. But he gave a different picture, didn't he, in terms of Edward's reaction? I mean, he sort of said that Edward's reaction was more volatile than what she had painted it to be.
Oh, very much so. And I mean, the phrase that sort of grabbed our headline and probably a lot of the online headlines yesterday was a conversation that the pair had after the wife had moved out, and Mr. Edwards basically rang him up and said, "You're having an affair with my missus," and the gentleman said, "Well, mate, I mean, it was as plain as the nose on your face, basically." Yeah. And Mr. Edwards didn't take kindly to that and threatened to kill him. Now, as it was pointed out by Mr. Jovich, he knew where the couple were living. He didn't follow through on that threat. So it was something of nothing, but he certainly did say it, and it wasn't said by Mr. Jovich that he hadn't said that. So yes,
Well, twice now we've heard that phrase. I feared for my life that we didn't follow through.
Right.
Yeah. Why did you fear for your life?
Yes, and we heard it from the
second wife
and the Hollywood hospital victim this afternoon.
She
clearly said, "I thought I was going to die," and I think she was probably quite fair in having that fear, because as you would when you're grabbed from behind in the middle of a workday afternoon.
You two must have just, your heads must have been spinning today as well, because you obviously don't get notice of who's coming in, who's going to be a witness and how many there's going to be. And I guess that's the same again for tomorrow. So each day it's just bombshell after bombshell.
It's unpredictable, the whole trial. I mean, even just the timing, we have to cut out at a certain time to get to air. Yeah. But they're just taking witness after witness. And even last night we all expected to sit quite late, and Tim had sort of cut off quite early. Yes,
he did get through his evidence maybe quicker than anticipated. But as you say, Nat, we're not being given sort of advance notice. We're trying to read the play a little bit in terms of where the evidence might be going. And then once we realised it was sort of Telstra Living Witness stuff today, we sort of anticipated maybe there's another couple, and we think there might be another couple tomorrow, possibly. But like all the listeners on the podcast, we're just waking up every morning and thinking, what's the day going to bring? So
another chapter.
Yeah, indeed, of a very, very long book.
Yes, well, it has been another extraordinary day. And, of course, we've obviously got sometimes more questions than we're getting answers at this stage. But and we have had quite a lot of you who have contacted us with questions. We'll try to get to those in tomorrow's podcast. We just had so much to pack in today. But thanks, Ali and Tim. We'll be back tomorrow for day 8. We'll chat then. Thank you.
This podcast was hosted by Natalie Bonjolo, produced by Kate Ryan and Alicia Preedy, and recorded in the studios of 7 West Media. Audio files were provided from the archives of the 7 Network and the West Australian. Sign up for daily emails and all the latest on the Claremont trial at thewest.com.au.